All right, this is the part 2 for yearly lesson planning and special education. So if you haven't watched the first part of this, make sure to go back and do so. But let's dive in if you are here to learn more. All right, so now that you have your state standards and the students' academic levels all laid out and understood, and you kind of have an understanding of maybe the curriculum and the supplemental materials that you need or you have to get, so those connections to those students' and IEP goals as well, you must now put it into action and complete your curriculum planning. So also, if you have a scope and sequence for your curriculum, make sure to follow that. If your students are unable to access that curriculum appropriately, but this video is for you. So let's start with the foundation. We're going to kind of build a house. So think about lesson planning tips as that. You wouldn't want to start building bedrooms without laying the foundation, that kind of thing. I kind of like the analogy. So when the school year starts in September or August, many of our learners aren't quite ready to hit the ground running with new concepts. So it's important that we review and refresh their memory on the concepts that they may have already been exposed to or they've already mastered. So we all know that many of our students regress also during the summer months and have a hard time remembering that content that they've already mastered for the year prior. So take some time to check your students' current knowledge of the content that you think you may want to teach. So do some benchmarking, baselining. It's important to take some time to ease your students back into the routine, obviously, of the school year, review any of the old concepts, and get good understanding of their knowledge throughout September and maybe even into October a little bit. So for the sake of clarity, I'll explain how I map out mathematics for my students. So building that first floor foundation. Once you have established where your students are, you should have an understanding of maybe where they need to go. Start from the ground up. For my students, it previously included reteaching numbers, shapes, colors, one-to-one correspondence, and kind of so much more. These types of concepts will help them work from the ground up. So I spend about 1 to 3 weeks on each topic, depending on their knowledge and understanding. And this kind of leads into the units of the content that I want to teach. Many of these students, many of these gain mastery with my students, but for some students, I'll report where their mastery level is at that point, and then we'll continue to move forward from there. So it's more of exposure. So for example, a student may be able to master one-to-one correspondence up to 3, but past that, their accuracy decreases dramatically. For many of my students, they would struggle with numbers or one-to-one correspondence, and I use what is called kind of a spiraling scope and sequence, and this allows that same concept to be practiced multiple times throughout the year, maybe in different platforms or different content areas. So my students will practice number identification in counting and one-to-one correspondence in telling time, money, budgeting, identifying more and less, patterns, addition, subtraction. So we lay it down kind of brick by brick and go through all of these topics. So now I know what you're thinking. If you're working on number identification, why would you teach addition? So hear me out. My previous students were middle schoolers, so they were working on number identification probably their entire life since they were small children. So how would you feel if you've been working on the same skill for 5 years, or maybe even close to 10 years without mastery? I don't expect my students to master addition skills before number identification, of course, but this type of exposure will open them up to maybe some new concepts that they may not have had an opportunity that they would typically have. So working on multiple rooms in the house at once. So you kind of do working on the multiple rooms in the house. So as I was saying, my students may be able to work on their foundational skills like identification of numbers and multiple units in the school year. For students working on telling time, I may have them identify the numbers on the digital clock, but they may not say 1:30, but for them, they might say 1:30. I would then model saying 1:30 because I don't want to teach them incorrectly, but I'm going to model the correct response without telling them that they're wrong. So they're identifying the numbers, but they're also telling time. For my students maybe working on money skills, they would identify the bills and count dollar bills and work on number identification and one-to-one correspondence that way. you can kind of see the pattern. I can track their IEP goals in multiple units, but I do not have to make much of an effort to do that extra. Find times in your units when your students can work on those IEP goals, of course, or make time. So make sure that you do that, because obviously we don't want those to go to the wayside either. So how do we spiral this in lesson planning? So spiral is staircase. Once you have a clear understanding of your 10 or so skills that you want your students to participate in, you can repeat it multiple times throughout the year. We all know our students do better with repetition. Instead of spending a month or two on one concept, I spend 1 to 3 weeks at the beginning of the school year, and then loop back for 1 to 3 weeks at the end of the school year, or maybe in the middle. Mainly, I break down these concepts by semester. I always try to do measurement tools, again, around Thanksgiving or a fall break, so that students can help where parents may be in the kitchen or with cooking any family recipes. I also try to teach money and budgeting around the holidays, so that students can practice giving gifts and buying gifts for one another. So curriculum mapping and lesson planning for the year can be overwhelming, confusing, and honestly time-consuming. So if you ever have any questions about how I do this, or you want me to show you some more information, feel free to reach out and ask any questions below in the comments. Thank you for watching today's video. If you're new here, make sure to click that like and subscribe button. It would mean so much to me. Click the bell to get notifications for when new videos get released or I go live. As always, leave a comment if you have any questions.